Talking tungsten and TIG welding. TIG welding is my favorite process. TIG welding is when you use a non-consumable electrode to emit a focused stream of electrons into your workpiece to melt that parent metal, and then with your other hand you've got some filler rod, you drip a little bit of filler rod in there and you make a weld. A non-consumable electrode is tungsten. Tungsten has the highest melting point of any metal, and we put alloys in it for arc stability, that type of thing. I use the purple ones, rare earth. Safer for you. I guess I'm officially old when I have a bunch of the radioactive dust in me from back when that was standard in industry. Used to only be pure and thoriated. Now we've got safer ones. Anyhoozle, 3/32 of an inch diameter is pretty common in industry. You can carry a current of, I think, 150 to 250 amps with a 3/32 inch tungsten. Of course, you could carry more, but it starts to overheat and it's just not made for that. You can also carry less, but the arc isn't quite as stable. I find myself doing a whole lot of smaller amperage welding in my shop, so I'm thinking it's high time, it's past time, I swap my 3/32 diameter tungsten for a 16th inch diameter tungsten. I said if you use too large of a tungsten, you run the risk of like uneven heating and contamination of the weld puddle and the end of your electrode. Same with this, if you use too much amperage for what it's designed to do, this can just melt and fly off. Seen it happen. Bunches of different kinds of TIG torches, depending on whether they're air-cooled or water-cooled, and there are different makes, but basically you always have this ceramic cup, and this is non-conductive. This isn't going to conduct electricity. It's soft and matte, and then it glazes over with time and heat, and it becomes brittle and more prone to cracking. The longer you use it, the more prone it is to cracking. So be careful when you set your torch down. This is what a new one looks like. Then you've got your collet body. These are the holes that the shielding gas, argon, comes out of. The argon runs up your lead and out these little holes and out your cup to protect your weld puddle. And then your collet inside. And welding machines aren't the only thing that have a collet. A collet is one of those words you could add to your vocabulary if you want to be like a mechanical type person. Open up your pen, like clicky pens. A lot of the pens have collets too. This one's twisted. Anytime that you've got a cylindrical thing that could slide in and out and you don't want it to, unless you want it to, you can put it into this split collar. See, it's just a tube. It's got a bit of a taper on it and it's got a split in it so that your cylindrical thing goes into there easily. But as you crank down on it, that split reduces the diameter down here and it pinches it tight so it can't slide in or out. That's what a collet does. Then on the back of the torch is just the pigtail, the end cap. Yeah. You can get a little teeny tiny one or these big long ones if you use full lengths of tungsten to accommodate like a full 7-inch tungsten. There's a little short stubby one. If you got to get in somewhere real tight, you can cut your tungstens really short and then prep them and put them in and then put the little button end cap on. For the vast majority of the places that I've worked, for the vast majority of the jobs there, a 3/32 of an inch diameter tungsten is what we used. I like it because I can use it on really low amperage stuff and I can use it on a little bit higher amperage stuff if you really have to push it, but I've never welded over 250 amps on one of these. 250 amps? That's a lot of amps. 250 amps. Like I know I've stick welded close to that, but I don't remember when. So there's my little naked torch. This may look a little different than the collet you are using in your machine. Just remember what a collet is supposed to do. See the pinchy end? When I say the pinchy end, that's where the slit is, that it actually does pinch and holds your tungsten in place. That doesn't go in first. The pinchy end goes out. That's what your tungsten is going to slide into, and then, you know, pinch shut so it doesn't slide. Collet body over the top. Finger tight. Don't tighten any of this stuff down with a wrench. Then your cup back on the end. Ready to rock. And I've got my wee little 16th inch tungsten. And don't forget to keep your tungsten sharp. The #1 advice I could give to anyone ever who is learning TIG welding and especially getting frustrated, keep your tungsten sharp. Don't try to TIG weld with a dull tungsten. You are just gonna get angry and you're gonna be wondering what's going on. And everything was going so well, why is everything sucking? It's because your tungsten's not sharp. Buy a box of tungsten off Amazon, or better yet from your local weld supply store, but buy a box of tungsten. They're like 20 bucks. Cut them all in half. Prep them all at a good 30-degree angle, and then have a pile of them on your workbench. That is going to cause you to spend like 20 minutes at a grinder someday resharpening them to a point, but at least you're not stopping yourself halfway through learning TIG welding because you're going to dip it. And what's ironic with TIG welding, I think, you got to worry about your angles, your travel angle, your work angle, your speed, the distance away from your material, the amperage, you got your foot pedal or your hand control, probably your foot pedal rheostat. That's a lot of stuff to think about. And the only way to make a really good TIG weld is to get as close as you can to your material without actually touching it. Because if you can get really close to that bead, you can actually push it. You can watch it. You can watch the arc pushing that puddle like up and down and left and right. It's really kind of a cool trick once you get that. Once you get the feeling that you can put that puddle wherever you want to, generally speaking, between using your knowledge of where the current is going to go, of where the ground is, and the angle that you're tipping your torch, is kind of a lot of fun, I think. But before you get really good at it, you get bad. My TIG students, actually, they would be bad, right? Like new welders learning how to weld, I'd keep saying, get closer, get closer. Oh, I was the worst. The instructor that will be right over your shoulder, watching you weld while you're welding. So like our heads are right next to each other, and I'm barking orders through my hood, through your ear, through your hood. Get closer, get up on that top edge, keep getting closer. And most of the time, their hands are shaking, they're trying to remember their filler material. Get closer, closer. And then they dip. And you got to break it off. And it boogers up the end of your tungsten. Please, if you're a new TIG welder and you're getting very frustrated because you thought you saw some improvement in yourself and then suddenly you're just dipping all the time, keep going, you're almost there. One of my favorite times in watching a new TIG welder learn how to TIG weld is that window where they just will not get their tungsten close to the material. They keep lifting it away, and I'm watching that arc fan out, and that means the heat dissipates. It's not focused into the beam. I say, get closer. They start getting closer, but then they get too close and they dip. But throw their torches, throw their hoods. Miss, hey, I keep dipping. No, you're doing it. That's it. Just trust me. Trust the process. You told me to get closer and I'm dipping. Yep, you've almost got it. Just don't get that close. Pretty soon you're gonna be in that perfect little window where your chosen amperage and the speed you're going is just perfect for pushing that puddle along where you want it to be. And you're going to be just floating and hovering over the surface of where that weld is. Plus also, like, the puddle is one size, and when you dip your filler rod in, it fills up real quick. And a lot of the times, as soon as you dip that filler into the weld pool, it pops up into a bubble. You have to anticipate that tiny little rise every time you add filler material. That's why a lot of people like to just wash over their rod instead of tapping it. One last thing I want to talk about is end prep on the tungsten. Point preparation. You don't want it like a hypodermic needle, and you don't want a bit of a stub on it. You want a 30-degree angle on the end of your tungsten. If you've got a tungsten sharpener, you can set it that way. If you've got a bench grinder, you just have to learn this. And if you're using a bench grinder, figure out how to sharpen your tungsten with the direction of the wheel spinning. If this is my wheel spinning this way, you don't want to prepare your edge like this and have your tooling marks going around. That'll make your electrons turbulate as they try to shoot off the edge. You want to sharpen like this, pointing up or down. I prefer to hold it like this. I've heard people say that they can catch and go into your finger. That's never happened to me in all of my years of doing it, but students have their tungsten sucked in underneath when they try to do it this way. So like, don't take my word for it. That's just how I do it with my bench grinder. How do you do it? This is a good all-purpose preparation for the end of a tungsten. This is too steep, this is too stubby. However, there are some welders who favor this on higher amperage uses. If you know that you are going to need a little bit of the higher end of amperage of what your tungsten is made for, an inverse correlation on how the electron beam comes out of the preparations of these. So even though this angle is kicked back and it's a sharper prep on the tungsten, it's actually gonna fan out the electrons a little bit. So if you're doing sheet metal or something thin, this might be a preferred preparation for you. If you may be doing some body work on a car, thinner material, this is the prep you might want to go with. Whereas this one will focus the electrons a little bit more punctuated, fire it straight down in. That 30-degree one is a good all-purpose beam. You get penetration and control without overheating that center. Usually good for catching the edge of a joint fit up, but it also drives the heat down in where you need it to be to make that homogeneous weld in the parent metal and the filler metal. Who needs a $2,000 smartboard? Do I requisition a smartboard around here? Here we go. Here's my tiny tungsten, a little bit more appropriate for what I've been doing. Oh, I don't have any 16th inch filler rod. I have stainless. Ooh, I'm gonna run a little stainless weld on a butter knife. Check out my buddy Bastion Metal Creations. He makes tiny little birds, and I think he uses 16th inch. Machine set to 95, and this I'm gonna need bifocals. Tiny TIG weld in my shop. One more thing about tungsten. This is the shit they don't go into in welding school. Back to my smartboard. Oftentimes, in prints and literature, you will still see tungsten denoted as a W because metallic tungsten's original name was wolfram. Tungsten itself was discovered by a Swedish metallurgist, I think in 1755, as an acid form, but then they made a metallic form of tungsten by reducing its oxide with carbon, and that made the metallic form of what we know as tungsten. I'm not going into all of this. There was something about the process of turning this acidic tungsten into what we know as a metallic tungsten, and it just absolutely consumed. Like when you're doing chemistry, if I'm remembering my acid-base chemistry right, when you add one reactant to another, there's a reaction. Like baking soda and vinegar, you know how it foams, gets all crazy, and then you're left with that watery stuff at the end. Apparently the reaction with tungsten oxide and carbon is similar, like it really, really consumes it, like a wolf consumes sheep. Wolfram, it's a Germanic word, a German word. So it is theorized, again from my cursory research online, that the metallic form of tungsten is called wolfram because it was so ravenously consumed in the process of making it. W for wolfram. We call it tungsten now. But they never went through all of that with me in school. They're just like, yeah, W for wolfram because tungsten used to be wolfram. I'm like, why did it get renamed? We keep improving things and changing things. I don't know. But that's the story of the W with the tungsten being called wolfram and then tungsten.